Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. The website is aroundtheempire.com. This is listener-supported, independent media. Please pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Follow us on Twitter @aroundtheempire. Please help me build up the YouTube channel by subscribing. That's free, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. Michael Krieger joins the show today to talk about his latest article, The Arrest of Julian Assange is an Attack on Journalism, Liberty, Self-Government, and Civilization. Michael explains how the extraction of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, the subsequent arrest, and the request for extradition to the U.S. was a profound turning point for investigative journalism, for freedom of speech, and for liberty and civilization. This event might end up being as consequential as the bailout of the too-big-to-fail banks and the impact that had on the financial system and the rule of law. Michael Krieger is the creator and editor of Liberty Blitzkrieg. He's a former Wall Street analyst from New York, now based in Colorado, where he is, as his Twitter profile says, the poet laureate of the debt apocalypse. We recorded this on May 8th, 2019. Michael Krieger's here speaking to us from Colorado. Hello, Michael. Welcome to Around the Empire, and thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, hey, Joanne. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat about whatever you'd like.
Yeah, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, you
and
as well.
Hey, my son is on his way on a road trip to Colorado right now.
Oh,
As a
wow.
matter of fact,
That
yeah,
sounds fun.
I'm getting all these pictures across my phone from these beautiful, beautiful mountains and big sky, and he's in Utah right now. He's coming up from Arizona to,
That's fun. That's the exact trip I did. I'm originally from New York City, and I was working there as well after I graduated college. And then I quit Wall Street in 2010 for, reasons that are probably obvious to people that know my work at this point. But I drove cross country for 6 weeks, and it was during that trip, actually it was in Utah, coming into Utah from Arizona, that I decided I couldn't live in New York anymore. And I went back home, went back east. I immediately canceled my lease and I moved out to Colorado months later.
well, these pictures are gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I can see the elevation. I guess he's in the foothills now,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see the elevation, rising and all these red rocks. And
Yeah.
he's on his way to they're going to a concert this weekend at that
Red
Rock Amphitheater.
Oh,
Is it?
it's the best. I can't see a concert anywhere else after that. It's
Oh,
so
really?
much fun. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's this band called Wolfpack.
Oh, I'm not familiar with them, actually.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. It's like a group of nerdy guys, and
Nice.
they have really good music videos. But yeah, anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, funny little coincidences.
Yeah.
So when I read Michael's article a few days after Julian Assange was snatched from the Ecuadorian embassy last month, I contacted him for this interview because, what he wrote helped me to understand what was going on in my own head at the time. It was, I knew I was angry about it, and I knew that, but there was a sense of dread, too. It was a mixed reaction. It was a strong feeling, and it just, it just stayed with me for a long, long time. So the article's titled, Arrest of Julian Assange is an Attack on Journalism, Liberty, Self-Government, and Civilization Itself. And Michael, you mentioned that you believe it's one of the most important things you've ever written. And you compared your reaction to the way you felt after the financial crisis and the banker bailouts of 2008. Can you expand on that and the reasons why?
Sure. So I'm assuming a lot of your audience probably isn't familiar with me or my sort of my background, but
yeah, actually, please do. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I should have had you do that right off.
Oh, no problem. No problem. It fits in perfectly with your question. But, I immediately after college, I started working on Wall Street, and I was on Wall Street for 10 years, two different main roles. The first role, I was an equity analyst for the oil and gas sector. So that was interesting because I really got to learn about, all sorts of, the most important commodity on earth, oil, and also the countries involved, the politics involved, the shadiness involved, essentially with how that industry works. But then I moved to another firm, and I became then I was a more broad commodities analyst on a trading desk, and it was there that the bailouts happened. And a funny story that I like to tell is that morning when it was announced that, or maybe it was the evening before it was passed, but remember they passed the TARP bailout.
I remember it very well. Yeah.
Right. They did a second vote on it because it didn't pass the first time. And I got to where I couldn't sleep, and I got to work very early the next morning. I was like me and the head of trading there, and that was pretty much it. And I was ranting. I mean, I was standing up and I was saying, this is it. It is never going to be the same after this. This is a tragedy. You can never go back. Blah, blah, blah. And, the head of trading, who's a really nice guy, but he didn't want to hear it because he was happy. He wanted a bailout, right. But for his own investments or whatever. And he's like, Mike, why don't you go take a walk around the block? And I just calmly, calmed myself down and sat down. But I knew right then and there that it was a turning point, that the era that had preceded this was now over. And we were launching into something very dark, very corrupt, very criminal. And as everyone knows now, that's exactly what happened. We bailed out criminals. We protected them from jail. Inequality has skyrocketed from Obama and Trump because of the fact that, all of the printing, the Cantillon effect, essentially, right? The money, the people who are closest to newly created money and loans are the ones who benefit. And so, you basically entrenched oligarchy, not just in terms of economics and money, but also in terms of the rule of law. I mean, the rule of law was completely thrown out the door. I mean, it's always been the case, right, that, powerful people and wealthy people have, are more easily able to skirt the law than your average person. This isn't anything new, but you can get to extremes, and as I'm sure you're aware, during the savings and loan crisis, hundreds of bankers were put in prison, and that was a much smaller crisis. In this one, no executives were even prosecuted. It was incredible. You had too big to jail. It was really it was one of the first phases that I can remember of like the finance oligarchy sort of taking the gloves off and saying, no, this isn't the country you think it is. This isn't the economy you think it is. We own this place, and you will accept it. And there was protest, but people sort of accepted it, and because Obama was doing it, quote unquote liberals didn't want to criticize it that much. I mean, of course, you had plenty of people on the left criticize it, but I'm saying, let's call it your average Democrat, refused to admit what their guy Obama was doing. And
I would say over time that happened, but the initial reaction was fierce, and that's why there was that second vote, because Congress was flooded with objections to the TARP bill. And I remember being outraged myself. I could, find the tweets for it. But I agree with you that over time it was, the premise was that he saved us from our, the entire global economy crashing. That's what the message morphed into. And the Democrats pretty much swallowed that.
Right. I think, and this brings up an important point. And I'd like to, also, the fact is, I worked in finance, and I can tell you straight up that at that time, the understanding of actually how things work and what was going on, even there on Wall Street, they didn't know. Most of the people on my trading desk had no idea about sort of how things work in the system, even the monetary system, the financial system really didn't. I mean, they're just happy that they got a bailout. But this was sort of, and we're dealing with this now with the tech giants. There's this what I call information arbitrage, where there's a small group of people who are sort of, let's say, running the schemes that know exactly how the system works and how it benefits them, and then there's everybody else. And in that time period where people are just getting up to speed. I mean, I guess it took people like 7-8 years to figure out how duped they were, right? I mean, that's the amazing thing, because people just don't have a good knowledge of the financial industry or central banking, money creation, any of these things. They just don't. They just don't know about it. And it's still the case. And I think a similar thing has happened with the tech giants. People just, didn't understand what Facebook was really doing. what Google is really doing, what Amazon is really doing. And now, again, we're starting to figure it out a little bit. But is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late, but I'm very disappointed in the inability of the public to, in a let's say, unified manner, exert pressure on regulators and Congress to do something about the power of these companies. And another issue is facial recognition, for example. I mean, we have laws on everything in this country, but there's no laws on facial recognition technology. And the DHS is now trying to roll out facial recognition at airports to 97% of passengers by 2023 without any public debate. No laws, no protections. It's crazy. So
there's no laws on facial recognition.
No. There's some on at the state level.
Geez.
At the state level, yeah. At the state level, there are. Like, I think, and in fact, I just saw an article. I didn't read it, but I think San Francisco and Oakland are looking to ban or put limits on it in their jurisdictions. So that's good. But why you can't expect DC to do anything. I mean, it helps the people. It's just insane. So, I got off track a little bit there. But anyway, my point was that I was seeing something because I was in the financial industry that other people weren't seeing 10 years ago. And I knew right away that it would shape our country in a very negative manner. And I think now anyone who's honest about it can see that that's what's happened. I mean, after all, Trump didn't get elected in a vacuum. There was obviously a lot of discontent that had been building up over these 10 years. The Assange thing, to me, it had the same effect. I felt like a precedent was being set, and if they could get away with this precedent, they would continue to push harder and harder and harder. And the precedent here is that the public doesn't have a right to know, essentially. Remember, the charges in this indictment on Assange have nothing to do with the election in 2016.
Yeah, isn't that something?
They're all Chelsea Manning. It's all Iraq war stuff. The video, but the Reuters journalist getting mowed down. So you have a situation where there's this anger that's been seething for 10 years on behalf of the national security state that Assange dared and WikiLeaks dared to expose the people to the truth about what governments are doing. And so, to me, it's, if they can get away with that, right? If they can get away with, so you're shuttering WikiLeaks and creating a precedent that, because it's classified, you're not allowed to see it. That's extremely dangerous, because if that starts to infect the minds of a considerable percentage of the population, we're going to lose free speech, right? I mean, we're going to lose journalism completely. And it's interesting because WikiLeaks has been the number one source of telling us about government crimes over the last decade. And it's no surprise, therefore, that the national security state is determined to make an example of him in WikiLeaks. So, in 2008, we lost a rule of law. We lost an economy that wasn't completely rigged. Now we're potentially losing journalism, investigative journalism as we know it. And as far as I can tell, the only response now, to me, if you want to actually expose classified information or national security leaks, I almost feel like it has to be done anonymously. There has to sort of be like a decentralized place where whistleblowers can drop information, and then the public can sort of just search that information on its own, because the state is clearly saying, if you are a public figure and you expose us in a way that's damaging to our power, they will never stop until they get you in prison. And that's the message that they want to tell. It's very scary.
Yeah. The other thing that you brought up is that, well, you said the most society destabilizing aspect of the period, the financial crisis, wasn't the financial crisis itself, but the response to it. And then you go into, you talk about how it's so clear now to you that you say, quote, there are two main classes of people in the country: those aligned with, in one way or another, the national security state, and those who are not. And if you're aligned with the interests of empire or somewhat prominent, you'll never suffer consequences for any of your actions. which, you talk about it being almost like an imperial royalty. And I was thinking almost like a made man too. There's almost a mafia aspect to it too. But, this divide of people who can do whatever they want and get away with it. And, the it's not even just a class matter now. It's if you're aligned with the interests of empire. And there's a vast variety of people who, are in that class, which you described too. And I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. And, it speaks to this, theory of propaganda, which I'm sympathetic to, which is that, propaganda is not meant to dupe intelligent people. It's meant to signal to intelligent people that we're going to lie on such a ridiculous level. And if you want to be part of our class, or if you want to get the benefits, as you mentioned, of the imperial made man mafia state, you have to go along with it. So it's almost a filtering mechanism. How can the national security state know who's loyal? How can the national security state know who will be willing to do anything for money? Well, it's pretty simple. You put out ridiculous propaganda and you see who's willing to spout it off. Who's willing, how many intelligent people are willing to say the most ridiculous things in order to advance their careers, to make money, et cetera. And so that's, in my opinion, a big purpose of actual propaganda. That's why it seems so clownish. That's why it seems so ridiculous sometimes, because it's signaling to people, just go along with what we're saying and you will be promoted. You will be rewarded financially. I mean, just look at the cheerleaders for the Iraq War. I mean, forgetting the politicians that actually did it, in the media, those who were in favor of it. I mean, they're all of those people, almost, except for maybe a few exceptions, are much more high profile now than they were then. Just like the banks are now bigger than they were before the financial crisis. Just like, Lloyd Blankfein, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and Jamie Dimon, the current CEO of JP Morgan, were not billionaires before the crisis and now are billionaires. This is how it works. This is one of the things that Bernie Sanders' campaign did so effectively in 2016. I mean, he came out there and just said it's rigged. It's rigged, and it is rigged. It's completely rigged. If you have a situation where you can create financial fraud on a globally catastrophic scale and come out of it with bailouts, wealthier than you were before and more powerful, what do you call that?
It's outrageous. I don't know what.
Right. What I don't know. I mean, if you can pump for war, if you can push a war based on lies that kill six figures of Iraqis, and then have suffered no consequences once your whole operation was exposed as a lie, what do you call that? And then what do you call the person who, steals a sandwich to feed himself and then gets thrown in jail? I mean, we have a very, very, and I think you put it perfectly. We have a mafia state, and you can argue that every state is essentially a mafia state within extremes, and that's the thing. It's not like the U.S. wasn't before. Any concentration of power, in my view, will lead to corruption and mob kind of tactics. But there are, levels and extremes, and I think we are at an extreme. We're at, as you probably know, as far as wealth inequality in this country, we're passing now pre Great Depression levels, 1929. I mean, that's where we're going with that. It's a total powder keg, and I feel like not enough people are willing to admit it. I think it's such a big problem and it's such a scary problem that we're suffering from sort of a paralyzation. Like this country is just incapable of doing anything about it, it seems.
Yeah, and there was a backlash to that with the Occupy Wall Street thing, and that was, it was just they used police force to just shut that down. But some of it has remained. I would say Bernie Sanders is a result of that, and you still see in every protest you'll see a V mask. So some of it is still around, but as you mentioned in your article, you said that we're being gradually conditioned to accept a society comprised of rulers and the ruled masters and servants. And I agree with that. There's a slow conditioning happening, and particularly as you talked about before in big tech. Like the whole big data industry it's a complete mystery. Like I don't think anybody even knows who the companies are who are the big data companies. And also, as you mentioned, they're always out ahead of the regulators. The government's, pretty clueless about what they're even doing. It's a lawless environment until the damage is done, and then they try to rein it in. And in some cases, like in the case of tech, um, I just don't see that the government's ever going to be able to be on the same level, technically, and to be able to rein it in. They're always going to be out front. And it's interesting because going back to the financial crisis again, I think it was Lanny Davis, was it, who
too big to jail or?
Well, yeah, and he made an argument that he was in front of some kind of a panel, and people were saying later on, like, why didn't you prosecute anybody? Why didn't you hold someone accountable? And he made an argument of like, they're better. Their lawyers are too good. We really couldn't bring a case that we were outmatched, is what he was saying. Oh, do I have the right guy? Was it Lanny Davis? Or was it Lanny? I may have the wrong guy. Or was it Lanny Brewer? I could have the wrong Lanny. Anyway, ooh, I'll edit the name into this if I have it wrong.
Okay.
As promised, I'm editing this in here. It was Lanny Brewer, not Lanny Davis. But he was basically saying that we're outclassed. We can't beat their lawyers and their,
right.
Well, again, intellectuals.
Let's just go right. I think that's complete garbage. The U.S. government will invade countries to get what it wants. Okay,
there's a good point.
Not only that, look what it did with Assange. I mean, it was determined to get that right. And this is a guy that told us truthful information, and it found a way to indict him for journalism, right? I mean, so in other words, you can, like they say, you can indict a ham sandwich. They can do whatever they want, and they didn't want to do it. And that's it. I mean, there's always going to be an excuse. There's always going to be a talking point for why criminals or corrupt politicians or regulators don't do anything about elitist crime. But it's always a lie. I mean, they didn't try. I mean, these deferred prosecution agreements, they were ridiculous. I mean, again, remember Citigroup, basically, that guy, I think it was Froman, essentially wrote to Obama saying, here's who you should put in your cabinet. And it was like the exact, Obama had the exact same people go in. That was leaked. I think that was actually from WikiLeaks.
I think it was. Yeah.
There you go. That they don't want that.
I think it was from the Podesta emails.
That's the kind of stuff. Yes, that's the kind of stuff they don't want you seeing. So no, I think that's total garbage. And look, you mentioned the tech giants and the surveillance capitalism is a nice term for it because I think that's correctly what it is. I saw a great quote on Twitter yesterday that I don't know if or 2 days ago, I don't know if you saw it, but I'll read it out here because I think it really describes the crux of the problem right now. It's by this guy, Keith Lowell Jensen, who I'm not familiar with. But the quote is, what Orwell failed to predict is that we buy the cameras ourselves and that our biggest fear would be that nobody was watching.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're at. And I mean, you think about it, more and more articles are coming out now. The Washington Post actually had a really good one on Amazon and its Echo, Alexa, and how that all works and all the data that it's getting, that it's recording your conversations and storing them. But not only that, it also points out that a smart home, anything that works with Alexa, the data, in order to work with Alexa, one of the deals that these companies are signing with Amazon is to give all the data that they're collecting to Amazon. So if you have an Alexa and you have an Echo and you have a smart home and you have all sorts of other things connected to it to make it function, you're not just giving your conversations to Amazon, which by the way, they claim that it only starts recording when you say Alexa or something, but it's very well known that it has quote unquote accidents all the time and starts recording other things. But Amazon is going to get your what time you go to sleep, what time your lights go off, what your thermostat is set to, when you're in the house, when you're not in the house. All of these things, all of this data is going to Amazon. So we have a voluntary surveillance state now, a corporate government surveillance state. Because if you look at Amazon, Bezos and Amazon have a huge deals with the CIA. They're working to do Pentagon, huge, massive billion-dollar Pentagon programs. So to call Amazon, this is the richest man in the world, to provide this person and his company with the most, and to pay for it, the most intimate details of everything going on in your house is crazy to me. But you know what? I can tell this to people over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter. Just like Facebook continues to have so many users. I mean, and this is what concerns me the most about the surveillance surveillance capitalism we're in. People don't care. People genuinely don't care. And unless enough people care, this is not going to change. So that's a big problem.
Yeah, I've had that conversation a number of times recently with a family member who just installed all kinds of things in a new house to be able to tell whether they're home or they're not,
Right.
so to control the thermostat and lights and things. And yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
but I always knew I don't like voice controlled anything, although the smartphones all have it. But, they claim that the processing is done on a third party, and that's why all the conversations have to be sent up to a third party server. But I mean, I always knew there was, if there was going to be a potential use for that, either by, if you could make money from it to glean some marketing information, or the government would be interested in it. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised.
Yes, of course. And there have been cases already where courts and judges have requested the Amazon recordings in
Oh,
homes.
really?
Yeah, where crimes have been committed. So I don't like crimes not going unsolved, but I mean, this just sort of proves the point that there's so much more. We're being tracked, and it feels like animals. I mean, and this also goes into the same theme as Assange and bank bailouts. We're in this gigantic sort of crazy relationship where 99.99% of the population is being watched and surveilled and threatened, coerced constantly by powerful interests, whether they're corporate or government. And we have no information on them, and they have all the information on us, and they're getting more and more of it, and they're getting it. Some of it they're just getting nefariously, as Snowden's whistleblowing showed us, but some of it they're getting voluntary. So between people voluntarily putting cameras and recording devices in their homes and what the government's doing, there's never been a more surveilled population of humans on the planet ever than we have right now, and nobody cares about it. Meanwhile, which we saw with what happened to Assange, you're not allowed to know anything about what the powerful are doing. They don't want you to. They'll classify anything so that you can't see it. So you're not allowed to know anything about what the powerful are doing, but the powerless people are surveilled constantly. And this is a very dangerous dynamic, because what it creates is a situation where, back to rulers and ruled, right? The ruled throughout history don't want to be ruled. Nobody says they want to be a slave. Nobody said they wanted to be a peasant to a lord that abuses them. There's a reason, though, that practices like slavery or feudalism or whatever sort of very unbalanced, let's say, power dynamics that have existed historically, the reason they last for so long, it's not because those people being subjected to this like the system. It's because there's such an unfair relationship, right? It's so insurmountable to get out of it that you accept it. And you make the best of it. And I fear that's where we're at. I fear that we're I don't know how far along or if we can change it. I think you can, but we certainly have to have people more concerned about it than they are now. And that's why I do what I do. I mean, I write this stuff I write the stuff I do. I spend all my time, thinking about and writing about this stuff, not because I think I can change it, but because I do feel like we have no chance of changing it. We have no chance of regaining civil liberties and citizenship, self-government. We have no chance of that unless a large enough mass of people is concerned enough about it. And I don't think we're there yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you talk about, the ruling class and the ruled, the the, let's just say, the 99%. It's obviously a much larger group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, you talk about there being several types. There are people who just go along to get along, and they're okay with that. And there are people who just don't know. And then you talk about the problematic ones. And I think this is where you describe that the sense of dread that I was feeling and not completely understanding. But this what happened with Assange, indicates that the problematic people, and you say, I'll just read this. You say, the people who go along or don't know, you say, these people, this is a quote, these people are perfect subjects. They pose no concern or problem to the protected national security state class. In contrast, there's a small percentage of the population that understand how evil, secretive, and corrupt it all is and cannot stay silent, simply cannot stay silent. These people are problematic. But the most troublesome ones, the ones who must be dealt with harshly and made an example of, are those willing to risk their lives and liberty to expose the crimes of government to the masses of people who, generally speaking, don't even seem to care. Three of the most prominent of these types are Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and Julian Assange. It should come as no surprise that one is exiled in Russia while the other two are in prison. And I think this is the signal. The point that you made about the overclassification, the secrecy that goes on. It's not just the whole issue that it's to protect our national security. I don't think anybody really believes that anymore. It's to cover up, and some of it will be for security, but it's to cover up corruption. It's to cover up embarrassments, and things like that. And those are the I think Julian Assange, his whole issue was this just massive over secrecy is oppressive. And so I think that was his goal, was just to expose more, just to bring more transparency. And as you said, for 10 years they've been coming for him on that. Now, I do think that there were other triggering factors. The Russiagate issue is definitely a factor, but putting that aside for a moment, with this, I call it a rendition. I see what they did with him as a rendition. What really not confuses me, what really irks me is that we have this ruling class, if you will, this national security state saying, Russia is a threat to our democracy, and just overall the what do they call it? The liberal world order is under threat. In other words, the empire, the rule of law, and they're always preaching all of these things. Meantime, they're destroying those very things. What they just did to Julian Assange is they just blew international law right out of the water with this, what they did, renditioning him from, coercing another state who had given him asylum to allow them into an embassy, which is supposed to be what's it called when it's a safe place. You're another state is not supposed to be able to go into an embassy and yank someone out of there. But just the whole process of what we just saw, they use these enormous instruments of power to just really blow the whole international law issue of embassies and asylums right out of the water. So, who is it that is destroying the rule of law and the international norms and the post-war world order and all of that? I mean, it's just total and complete hypocrisy.
Right. So, what's interesting about all that is, I like to see that sort of thing in the context of where we are in this in the, in the lifespan of, let's say, empire. And clearly the fact that the national security state, the ruling elite, the status quo, whatever you want to call them, is now in a different phase. We've been in it for a little while now, but it just keeps accelerating. And I think Assange, represents another acceleration. I think a potential war with Iran would be another. I think some of what's going on between Trump and China is another. I mean, it's we're now at the point that enough people don't buy it. No one's really buying the liberal world order anymore, unless you're brain dead. It was never that. And I think in that article, maybe it wasn't that article, but it was a subsequent one. I linked to a really good article saying, something like it was called something like farewell to the liberal order, which never really existed, and it never did. But enough people were under the illusion that it did. And that's when empire is at its strongest. When the US can run the world by making everyone convinced that it's a moral superpower, and Disneyland is its ambassador. That's when empire is powerful. When it has to take the glove off, and start smacking people around in broad daylight, then you're in a different spot. And that's where we are now. And a lot of my writing is focused on the fact that for the first time, in my view, since World War II, you have a situation where, or at least since, let's say, the fall of the former Soviet Union, you have a situation where there are interests, nation-state interests outside of the U.S. hegemony, who are powerful enough, in my view, to resist and frustrate empire. And the more that empire is frustrated and resisted against, the more it'll lash out.
More
and
dangerous,
yeah. But the more it lashes out, I think the more it exposes itself. The the more it becomes hard to actually keep it all together. Because if the U.S. has to use the stick 100% of the time instead of the carrot, it's the empire's over, in my opinion. You can't beat the whole world over the head with a stick forever. And so U.S. power was maintained, in my view, for so many decades by a stick and a carrot, and they worked together. And the stick really didn't come out that much. But now it's like everything's a stick. It's always the stick now. And I fundamentally believe that's a signpost that it's ending. That this era is ending.
Right. And as far as Assange being a turning point, as I said, I think there are other factors here, but I think it's an opportunistic. I think they need to keep him quiet in order to keep this whole Russiagate narrative together. But the other thing that we're seeing is, well, here's one little example. Hillary Clinton had a ridiculous interview with Rachel Maddow the other night. I think it was a few days ago or last week. And she went off on this hypothetical narrative where she imitated when Trump said, Russia, if you're listening, get Hillary's emails. And she said, China, if you're listening, hack Trump's tax returns. And then she played out the scenario. And within it, she says, and, hand them off to whatever replaces WikiLeaks. So, she threw that little bit out there as if WikiLeaks is completely crushed and destroyed. Just a little tidbit there. But there are other things that I'm seeing, like there is a podcast called Intelligence Matters, and it's a podcast hosted by Michael Morell, the ex-acting CIA director, right?
I know, yeah, I know about
it.
it.
Yeah. And they were at some kind of there was a conference at the Hayden Center, another former CIA, right?
Michael Hayden, yeah.
Yeah, and the topic was like they had media, investigative journalists and other journalists there, and sort of like, let's work together so that we don't release materials that are dangerous to national security. So almost like they're trying to form a new norm as, what kind of thing, when they do get, hacked, and when they do get a leak or they get information from a whistleblower or whatever, almost like a tacit agreement from the media to not publish things that the national security state doesn't want published. And that was so they're trying to create a new norm. And then one more example is that some of the candidates, the Democratic primary candidates, are offering pledges not to use material that was hacked. I don't know if they promised leaks, but they certainly promised not to use material that was hacked. So you can see that this is a moment when they're trying to create this turning point, not only with the with the power of the abuse of power of the state apparatus, but also they're trying to create like the willing servants of the empire to agree just not to do what was done in the 2016 election.
Right. So this is a really good point. And this right goes to the crux of what I've been trying to say about, the Assange situation. It's almost as if they're trying to create an Overton window for investigative journalism, where only things that are approved by the state can be published.
Yeah.
Right? The only information that the public is supposed to have is stuff that the state wants you to have, and anything else is dangerous or bad, or which again, I mean, that's just straight up dictatorship. That's not self-government. It's not nothing resembling that. And they always couch it in these terms of, safety or, foreign meddling, but it's nonsense. I mean, truth is the truth. If our government's committing crimes, they're committing crimes. And there's no more serious crime than a crime committed by government, because government has the right to put you in jail forever. So again, it's this crazy relationship where we're being convinced and conditioned to be subjects, to be spectators in our own lives. Where the only thing that journalism should be is entertainment. I could see a future where, I've thought about this for a while now, where a large percentage of the public is, you've seen the movie The Matrix, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so the equivalent to me that I could see within our lifetimes would be masses of people sitting at home on a virtual reality headset 12 hours a day, and maybe that home could be a, government subsidized thing, or there might be universal basic income by then or something like that, which, it's just fine. But I just see a future that's attempted to being created where people just become sort of zombies, complete
Very
zombies.
passive. Yeah.
Yes. Where they're just living in, because look, we're all living in our own sort of realities. And, some people just are completely disconnected from any sort of truth about what's going on around them. And some people have a little bit more knowledge. But yeah, I think that the objective is to, at least for a large amount of the public, get them so completely disconnected from anything that's going on that affects their lives that they're sort of just like zombies all day. So it's not a pleasant vision of the future, but it's certainly, the technology is there. I mean, I could see it. I could see how people could be comfortable just sitting on a virtual reality set for their their whole lives, not even know that anything is going on outside of it.
Yeah. I sort of started talking about the whole issue of where, what the dread feeling, the source of the dread feeling was, but I think I went off on a tangent. But what happens to people like us who tend to resist this kind of thing, the problematic people? We can already see a little bit of the deplatforming issue, and they just sort of, they pick the worst villain first, and they do it to the villain, and people cheer about it, and they don't realize that they're next if they step out of line. There seems to be this terrifying thing that the populism that's rising up, and that people might elect another unacceptable candidate, and they're just the whole issue about how Trump, obviously the mainstream media was working against him through the whole campaign when he still got elected, and there was this shock, and then I guess they decided it was memes and it was social media and so there's an attempt to sort of shut all that down. Plus, the Bernie supporters, I guess, were considered to be part of the problem too. Like, where do you think that's going to go? Do you think that people will tolerate this deplatforming?
No, I don't. And I don't think it's possible to silence voices really in the modern era with the technologies we have. So as far as that's concerned, what I've been saying, well, there's a few things. So first, as far as, let's say, Twitter, because that's the one I use. I believe that's just, I don't know if you use any other social media, but I think you like that one as well.
Hardly. Yeah, I
Right.
hate Facebook, and
Yeah,
I
I'm not
barely
on.
use anything.
Okay. So as far as Twitter, this is what I always say. Trump is on, is on Twitter, the president of the United States, right? He's tweeting all the time. Not only that, like, I mean, he literally tweeted a change in policy towards China about tariffs on Sunday, which is by far the biggest news in the global economy for the last 5 days. So if you're banned from Twitter, you are absolutely banned from the public square. Twitter is a public square. I don't care what anyone says. If the president of the United States is putting out policy that affects the world on Twitter, and Jack Dorsey thinks he can just ban you because he doesn't like what you're saying, this is a problem. This is an existential problem. It's not okay. No one should accept this. It's absurd. And what I've said for a long time, and I wrote a post about this last year. I said, we need, right, as Americans, at least, we still have on the books strong free speech laws. It's in the court, through the court system. Like, there's no such thing as hate speech. It's not an actual legal thing. And so the policy for a U.S.-based company, in particular, like Twitter, should be, if you don't break the law, you're on the platform. I think that's clean, because that way you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of saying, I like this or I don't like this, or whatever. You're just saying, listen, if it's not against the law, then it can be spoken. And as ugly as that is, that's the best thing, because here's what's going to happen. Okay, they're sort of they're deplatforming or we're banning too many people now. I think a lot of people look at Alex Jones and say, well, look, he got kicked off the platform and his voice isn't as big as it was. And I would agree with that. But I don't think it's because he got kicked off the platform. I think really what it was Alex Jones was already on decline. I mean, I think I remember 3 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe shortly after Trump was elected, and he sort of just became this crazy whacked out cheerleader for Trump, and going against everything he used to say. I wrote a tweet and I said, I'm shorting Alex Jones here. I was like, this is peak Alex Jones. And it was, so he was obvious, he was already kind of, he had peaked, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot of people, not a small group, tens of millions in the US who are, I guess I would say, radically against the status quo. And those are people on the left and the right. These people are more informed, I would say, and from my own perspective, than the average person, because I believe that if you have any ethics whatsoever, understanding, and you recognize how this country or the world actually functions, you can't be quiet about it. You can't accept it, again, unless you have no ethical framework whatsoever. And so these people across the political spectrum are not going to shut up, and a lot of them are really smart, and a lot of them are really clever. And if it's not going to be Twitter, it's going to be something else. And at some point, if Facebook and Twitter continue to do this, there will be a mass fleeing of people to other platforms. And I don't know what those platforms will be, how they'll be structured. I have some ideas that I'll touch on real quick about how I think they should be structured. But once that happens, then you have the worst case scenario. And I wrote about this as well last year. When you have, at least now, right, if you have offensive people on Twitter, if you have people you really think are despicable, right, even if they have a lot of followers, I'd rather see it. I would rather see that it's there. I would rather see that it's there. I'd rather know that it's popular, so that I can sort of create a framework in my mind of what I'm dealing with. What is happening to the society? Where are we going? Why is this popular? Do I need to leave?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Whereas if you keep banning them, they're not going to shut up, and they're going to find their own little places to talk. And guess what? Me and you aren't going to be on those places. And then Joanne and Michael Krieger are going to be much more ignorant than we were before, because there's going to be these subcultures that are growing outside of the spotlight, and that's way more dangerous.
Yeah, going underground. Then we don't understand our reality.
Exactly. And then before you know it, these movements could take over something. And then then there's no stopping it. So this is the worst thing you could do. I mean, this is literally the most dangerous. It's childish, it's short-sighted. But again, I mean, that's what we are. We are a childish, superficial, and short-sighted society. It's we have a lot, look, the public is to blame for a lot of this. We really are that. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah.
And just the last thing I just wanted to mention on that, and I also probably have to take off in a few minutes, is that is open source code. When I first learned about Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, and it captivated my interest because I realized some of the things. I mean, first of all, just the fact that it couldn't be stopped, by governments, because of its decentralized nature. Nobody's running it. There's no Bitcoin company. There's no Bitcoin CEO. That really created a paradigm in my mind for how a lot of other things need to be structured to fight back against the forces that are so asymmetrically more powerful than us. And so I think the same goes for social media and communication. Let's say communications tools in general. I think they need to be neutral. I think they sort of need to just be code. I think they need to be open source code, more importantly, because for us to accept as a people that these companies, Facebook and Twitter and Google, have these algorithms that are hidden, and we rely on them to speak to one another, is a very dangerous and stupid thing. And so we really should know, the code behind platforms that we're using to communicate. And so I think if we're going to, it's similar to what I said earlier about with journalism from now on, that you almost have to just like do it anonymously on a sort of maybe even a decentralized, platform where you're just dumping documents or something. I think the same sort of thing needs to be applied to communications. You don't want a person or an executive management team or even a for-profit company to be in charge of something as important as how 7 billion people around the world discuss issues with one another. This is not acceptable to me. But again, we're so far, but these things can change fast. But that's what I hope happens. Right. I hope we go to that place instead of having, certain types of people, more mainstream types on Twitter, and then, all the more like ethno-nationalists on another platform, and then the leftists on another platform, and then because that's just not good, because then it's just all echo chambers.
Yeah, exactly.
And nobody even knows that there's other opinions. Very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I just have one last thing is in that same vein is that, there's people are being taken down from hosting services and things like that too. I mean, that's an issue. Now, you're saying that you believe that it has to be a sort of a popular movement, almost a market-like thing to rein these large tech companies in. And, at one time, I would have said that, we've got antitrust laws, they just need to be enforced and all that. But what I'm seeing happening, Michael, is that the government they would really like to commandeer the awesome power of these tech companies. And the only time I see them threatening to enforce the antitrust laws are when they want to bend these tech companies to their will to get them to do the things they want to do. So I don't see the government being the solution for this. So I'm going all libertarian on this one with you, because I'm just watching it happen. Instead of going in and breaking up these companies, which they fully have the power to do, they're thinking, wow, look at all the power Facebook, look at all the power Twitter and all these other platforms have. We want to use that. So we can't break them up. We're going to have to we'll just threaten, but we'll never do it. And, eventually the tech companies are going to realize that they're never going to follow through on it. It'll become an ineffective threat, and they'll just, increase their power. So, yeah, I do agree with you that it'll have to be a popular effort to abandon them, rein them in. I don't know, build a new platform, but I think it's easier said than done. But like you said, sometimes things can happen quickly, and we have to have some optimism, right?
Yeah. No, look, I mean, here's the thing, Joanne. Like, I really, really believe this. I'm actually, look, I wouldn't do this unless unless I saw a really good chance to turn this around. Well, because what would be the point? I'd sit in my, I'd be in my garden all day. I'd be in another country or whatever. I mean, here's I will end on a positive note. The tools are there. We actually now have technology where we can do this. Because again, government breaking up Facebook or Google, whatever. I mean, it probably needs to be done, but it doesn't solve the issue at the end of the day. It probably makes things better, but at the end of the day, the issue is this: these models are crazy for communication. It's crazy to have billionaires running for-profit companies with secret algorithms that you depend on to communicate with other human beings is absurdly stupid.
Yeah.
And so, until we understand that, right, it's almost like, and this is where I have a problem with some like leftists. I think they're coming from the right place, but it all too often feels like begging, like please, like let give us some scraps, instead of truly radically reforming the way things work. It's like, raise taxes or raise the minimum wage or whatever. It's just like make our slavery better. And it's better than a lot of other people. It's better than like the liberals and neoconservatives, but it's not really radical. It's actually kind of like slaves begging for like.
It's still subservient. Yeah,
exactly. It's absolutely subservient because you're basically saying that, okay, well, the way things are structured is okay. We just need to tweak it. Even they're saying like, sort of, we need to tweak it. So anyway, yeah, I probably better run. I think.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Michael. Let's talk again sometime soon. And I very much appreciate your time. Oh, tell people where to find you.
Oh yeah, thanks. So anyway, I'm very active on Twitter. @LibertyBlitz is my handle. So you can find me there. I tweet all the time. I also write at libertyblitzkrieg.com once a week these days, usually just a thoughtful piece on an issue, whether it's geopolitics or the economy or financial markets and civil liberties. Those are my big issues. So
now, do you have a Patreon or a subscription model?
Oh yeah. So no, I do. It's all voluntary. I have no ads on my site. I switched that model in February. So I don't, I used to have advertising, Google and all that, but I cut off Google and everything else. And now I'm just depending on reader support. So the only money that comes into for my work that I do is through voluntary donations. I have Patreon. You can donate through Bitcoin. You can do PayPal. You can send cash, a check through the mail to my P.O. box. It's all available at the support page on my website. And I do appreciate that if people like this interview or what I do, to throw a donation. Because again, I do this, as a sort of a public service. But yeah, I mean, there's no money coming in unless people donate. So I do appreciate
this is listener supported too. So I definitely appreciate that. that model. Okay, thanks so much and take care.
Okay, thanks, Jen. You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. A special thanks to Michael Krieger. Follow Michael on Twitter at LibertyBlitz and find his work at libertyblitzkrieg.com. Around the Empire is listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Special thanks to long-term patrons and new patrons and contributors, also to everyone who messaged me with suggestions and feedback. It's really appreciated. The audio podcast is the main focus here, where we have the most traffic. Many ways to listen to it. Find it, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, or listen to it on the website, aroundtheempire.com, or on patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or on YouTube, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. If you're listening to this on YouTube, hit the thumbs up to like the video, leave me a comment, don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.